coming into play, and you'll note that that bylaw does not currently address Airbnb, and I think that's still a question that's out there. So to your point about impact, I think the number of rooms comes into the question about what that is. Remembering, of course, that the bylaw as currently constructed applies to existing homes. So you would have to have an existing home that already had sufficient room for 10 guest bedrooms in order to be able to have 10. So my expectation was that it was going to be reduced, but it's a valid question as to the number of what the appropriate number of guest rooms is.
Okay.
So.
Sorry, I did have another question. Would this be allowed in just historic estate type buildings, or could this be anywhere in town?
It could be any, as it's currently constructed, it would be anywhere in town that could meet the other requirements, for example, the parking requirement. So there are some lots that would not be large enough to allow for the amount of parking they need for the bedrooms without putting that parking in, say, the front yard setback, which is also not allowed. So the parking does act as a restriction. The parking and the landscape buffer requirement, the width of that acts as a restriction on where it could be located. But again, to a couple of points that were made earlier, the question would be whether or not that's a sufficient restriction. And do we want to, as a town, restrict it solely to historic buildings? And then you have to decide what's historic. But my point, you start to get my point as far as how we get there. But at the moment, anywhere that could meet the siting requirements.
Well, this article is a page and a paragraph, and I feel like it's a great start to a discussion, but I don't know that we're there yet for town meeting. So I would love to hear more study and think about more controls and think about where this could be a win-win situation and how to steer the language in that direction. So so I'll rush to the next one. On the proposed sign bylaw, I had a similar question to the one that Alex had, and that is, are the residents and business districts treated the same? Is that the case? Or
They're actually divided up in the bylaw.
They're divided up inside.
They may not be divided up to the satisfaction of everybody looking at it, but there are different provisions for each. So.
Okay.
And some signs allowed in common and some that are separate depending on which district.
So I think detail is great, and I think insight into how the process what works is great. I learned an awful lot about signs today reading this. In subparagraph E of paragraph 3, design review process, it describes a process where the building commissioner, sign review committee, and the selectmen all apply different standards in deciding, and I was just wondering if that could be kind of combined or tailored in a way so that everybody's sort of have the same guidelines.
Yep.
I was at one of the meetings where some of the citizens came forward to create a sign article, and it was my understanding that one of their primary goals was to give the selectmen less discretion to go along with inappropriate, what they saw and what apparently a number of the citizens saw as inappropriate signage. So in that paragraph, it seems that in the end, the selectmen are authorized to issue, quote, relief from the requirements of the section if they make certain findings. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to bring back to that main focus. If that's what the citizens are asking for, then that would be the goal. But I went to 2 out of 3 of the zoning workshops, and I thought the pictures of the different types of signs that exercise was interesting. I thought the survey and Tim's analysis, I thought we were off to a really good start. I thought it was going really good. I thought the appetizers were great. I didn't think we got into the meat and potatoes. This is the first opportunity where we've really been given the opportunity to kind of dialogue with you, and I appreciate this opportunity to get into the substance of any and all of these articles. I do appreciate, I know when I hear you each working on these individually, I feel for you. It's a lot on you. So I do hope that the planning board members will have the time to talk amongst themselves and to work together, and we look forward to collaborating with you in future workshops and making these articles as best they can for the town, because I know you all care about the town, and I hope you know that we all care about the town too.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to speak to the zoning articles? I saw you in the back, ma'am, and then you, sir. Come on forward.
You can use this one, sorry.
Sure. Hi, I'm Judy George on Ford Ranch Road, and it's been a
Welcome.
long 3 years of process, and I'd like to just talk about, I think you have enough people in the room. You have a lot of different agendas in this town, I've learned, and it's very hard to bring a group with different agendas together. But I think I admire the process that you're trying to do by having these meetings. But what's missing, and I can't put it all in words, is that it's not that the neighborhoods want to stop progress, or they don't want to see good things happen for this town or affordable housing, but they want to be included in the process more. And I found that I was reactive through this whole past 3 years. I would have been proactive if I understood what was the mission, what were we trying to accomplish on Ford Ranch Road. When the 3 houses didn't work, was the only outcome a 40B? Because that's what I had to address when I got involved, the threat. And I feel a lot of neighborhoods feel like that, Emily, that there's a threat. You either do what we want or you're going to get a 40B. And I don't think that's the way town officials really feel. I just think that's the way it feels in the neighborhoods where that threat comes in. And we have a lot of neighborhoods who feel that way. I'd like to see a process, a better process, a more inclusive process, where a group of us don't have to react, run to the planning board, tell you what we want, run to the warrant committee, try to change their minds, run to the selectmen, try to change their minds. And at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want what's best for Milton, but not at the sake of what made this town so great. My husband and I worked to find money to buy land because we were getting up in the world, and Milton was the kind of town that you felt. And I want all my kids to feel that way. They can't move to Milton yet. They haven't got the money. So it's not about affordability or keeping people out. It's really about the kind of quality of life that Milton has, for me, for 50 years brought. So I think there has to be a better way that the neighborhoods don't feel like we're trying to make a lot of developers and their people who represent developers wealthy at the expense of the neighborhoods, because that's today what it feels like. So I'd like to change that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You had a comment?
Yes. Phil Trohenning, 23 Parkwood Drive.
Welcome.
My comment is that, when I read through the master plan and when I hear people talking, they say, one of the things we can do to, let's say, stabilize the finances of the town is to attract commercial businesses, and it's going to bring tax revenue and blah, blah, blah. And I think, maybe some of that is in these articles when people say, a bed and breakfast. There must be some tax implication that's going to benefit the town. Accessory dwellings, that must have a tax implication for the town. But one of the things I worry about is that it also has a cost implication for the town that is not addressed in the, like if I go at work and I say that I want to do this, then you have to lay out a case with all the pluses and minuses. So what are the pluses in terms of revenue, and what are the minuses? Who's going to inspect these facilities? Is it the health department, like for bed and breakfast? And how many people do we have in the health department? 2? How many would we need to go out and inspect all of these beds and breakfasts, and how often would they have to be inspected? And where would these people sit? Like, do we have to add on to town hall? And when you increase density, like with accessory dwellings, you know, there's like a certain friction that gets created because people are constrained in space. And what about like fire department? What about police department? And where are these people going to sit? So I really worry that what we have done is we've become enraptured of the idea that this is going to really help our town by bringing in a great deal of revenue. That's the impression I get. But I think it's going to bring in a lot of cost, and I'm not sure where the balance ends up at the end of the day. So I really think when we put something down about beds and breakfasts, for instance, and we have to specify, okay, how many of these could there be in town? You know, how many, like they were talking about the lists. I thought the lists were a great idea. So how many could we potentially have? And what would the implication be for the fire department, the health department? All these people have to do inspections and are required to do inspections. And town employees, I'm sure town employees would say no, but I feel they're very expensive. You know, they have benefit packages that are extraordinary, and their salaries aren't bad either. So, you know, cost in terms of additional town employees are true costs. They're very expensive costs. So I think, you know, we cannot take this lightly. We cannot take the whole idea of the master plan lightly. There will be benefits, but when the scales come into balance, I don't know where they're going to end up. And I think the addressing the cost, the additional cost, is something you must do when you look at these and you bring them to town meeting. They can't just think that the scales are like this and they're getting a tremendous benefit. They have to be able to see what is the balance. So we see the benefit, I imagine, what's the cost? Thanks.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak to the zoning articles? Yes, please come forward.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Welcome.
My name's Gene Irwin. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 9, and I've attended all the condominium meeting workshops. And I'm not a member, I'm a participant, but I was invited by several members to attend. They thought, because of my real estate background and so forth, that I could contribute something. And it's with great frustration I'm here right now. We all, most everyone in this room, have attended multiple meetings, and we're not getting anywhere. The earlier points about, you know, John Flynn weighing in on some of these things, I think is important. And I think from what I've seen, we are endeavoring to do a lot of dangerous, foolish things that a good lawyer could have, you know, advised us and saved us countless hours collectively. I mean, I sat back there, waited my turn for about 2.5 hours like everyone else. And to me, the waste of humanity, that there's a tremendous amount of resources in this room. And I feel like, and I'm sad to say this, Emily, I feel like we need new leadership on this. We're not getting anywhere. I don't know yet, in all the meetings that I've attended, if there's one word that is ready for prime time. To me, this entire process is ready for bedtime. And I'm sorry to say it, but I just feel like, you know, when you look at this whole thing, it's like I think of Mr. Magoo. And, you know, I feel like this thing is not only off the tracks, it's like on the telephone poles, it's on the telephone cords, it's everywhere. And I feel like, you know, it's, this is like having, you know, Mr. Magoo valet over at, you know, Gillette Stadium. We're not getting anywhere. And I say, this is a big issue. It's tied in with the master plan. And I just think the whole thing has been flawed from the get-go, and I don't see any improvement. I don't see where we're getting anywhere. Again, I had hoped that we might get one scintilla accomplished tonight. I don't see it happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak to the zoning articles? Yes, please come forward. And then, sir, I saw you up at the front next, so.
Peter Mullen, 19 Gaskins Road, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2.
Welcome.
I want to echo comments that some of the board members made and also members of the public that I think the planning board has bitten off more than it can chew here. Drafting zoning bylaws is a very time-consuming process, and it requires a lot of consultation, particularly with some of these topics that you have. I just don't think that there's enough time, certainly in between now and town meeting, to address all the issues that are raised by these articles. I've seen what I believe are the comments that Mr. Whiteside distributed tonight. I think we all owe him a debt of gratitude for the time and the effort that he's put into reviewing these articles. I agree with many of his comments. And I think there's a huge number of technical problems with the articles, even if you know, you're not addressing the policy issues, just the technical problems. I think there's a huge number. The question has come up tonight in several contexts with regard to town council's review of these proposed articles. I think you absolutely have to have town council's review. And I'm not sure that town council could review all of this stuff in sufficient time to give you any kind of serious feedback before town meeting. It's a time-consuming process, and you've got to look at the implications of all these provisions. And review by town council is not inexpensive. And the more things that you ask him to review, the more money we end up spending. I've looked a little bit at the sign bylaw, and I think it raises a lot of issues. One of the things that the sign bylaw does is it attempts to incorporate the building commissioner into the sign approval process, and it appears to me, I don't know the number of applications for signs we get in a year, but it seems to be imposing substantial duties and responsibilities and time-consuming duties and responsibilities on the building commissioner. I don't know if anyone's discussed that with the building commissioner or with the town administrator or with the Board of Selectmen. I mean, we just adopted an article at town meeting to create a strong town administrator, and I don't know whether the town wants to be spending the building commissioner's time on sign approvals or wants to spend it some other way. I think there's huge issues with regard to political and idea signs. That's constitutionally protected conduct. The proposed draft of the article purports to exempt those kind of signs. Alex's comments raise questions about, well, couldn't we have some regulations on sizes? I think there's a provision in your bylaw that says those kind of signs have to come down 60 days after posting. I'm not sure that that will pass constitutional muster, and it's the kind of issue that somebody who feels strongly either about their political sign or their idea sign might well want to litigate about. And again, I think it could end up being expensive. I think the process for sign review does seem burdensome, and it does seem like there's varying criteria that different groups or people in the process are going to be applying, and I don't think that's a good thing. You can get divergent results if you have different criteria. I don't think there's any possibility to address all the issues relating to these things tonight. The one suggestion that I'd make to you is that I think the planning board's credibility will be at issue at town meeting. And I would suggest to you that you want to go forward only with those articles that you're absolutely certain are ready for review at town meeting, and that can be defended and can be explained. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, sir, I saw you with your hand up, so you please come forward.
Yes.
I'm Jack Arabian. I've lived in the town since 1970. I have a home on Gordon Road, and I've attended many of these meetings. I'm a process engineer. I've been in the business for a long time. I've modeled processes, and I find that one of the ways to solve some of these problems that were discussed tonight was to look at the low-hanging fruit. And maybe, and I've expressed this before, we're looking to get something done. And from the comments we've had tonight, it's obvious to me that there's a lot of frustration in moving forward. So the question is, how do we do that? And I had made the comment that we should look at what the priorities are and determine first, what should we attack in order to be able to present something reasonable to town meeting? There doesn't seem to be any one of these at the moment that approach that criteria. So my suggestion, I mean, tonight we've had a lot of comments that are indicative of the town being citified, if I may use that word. We don't want to be a city, we want to be a town. So let us not be citified. And if that would be our criteria for determining what goes before the town meeting, let's establish ourselves a priority and say which of these items we could present first. Now, I've looked at all of them so far. My comment is that the most difficult one is the signs. The one that has had the most study appears to me to be the one that, I believe your name is Alex? Yes, has done the most work. It seems to me we ought to grab something like that and say, that's the low-hanging fruit. Let's work on it, get it done, and present that at town meeting. If there's nothing else to present, fine. Let's go to the next one at the next town meeting. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else wish to speak to the zoning articles tonight? All right. First of all, before we move it back to the board, I want to thank everybody who participated tonight. Your comments were all excellent. Actually, I'd hoped to have more of these at our last public forum prior to coming to this point, but I'm very pleased that we had them tonight for all of the members of the board to hear, and obviously for the public. So thank you all, and also for those of you who attended the workshops that we had earlier in the session. Again, thank you for your attendance. The more people who participate in the process, the better the process becomes. So I want to bring it back to the board members to discuss how we want to go forward. But before that, just a couple of ideas of things that I heard tonight that I want us all to think about in our discussion. First of all, we did bite off a lot for this summer. We had a shortened time frame. This was something that the planning board, again, has never really done before, is to come up with proactive zoning and work it through. We knew it would be a short time frame. Frankly, I'm actually surprised that this many articles survived to this point. I'd expected more of them to drop off through the process. So I want to certainly thank every single member for attending the meetings, working on the zoning, providing their comments. I know some of the people who have spoken tonight have not considered the process a success. I would say that the fact that we went through it, the fact that we tried it, the fact that we are learning from it and coming up with new ways of how we consider this makes the very act of having the process a success. Was it perfect? Of course not. First time we've done this. Will we continue to make it a better process as we go forward? Absolutely. That's why we're here. We're learning from it and moving forward. One of the things that I think was common to a lot of the comments is the idea of the unintended consequences of the zoning that we've looked at. Partly that is a matter of having had the short time frame and just taking the step forward to say, you know, if we're going to try and write the zoning, how are we going to do it? But certainly, as I reviewed all of the zoning, including the ones that I drafted myself, as I listened to the comments tonight, both from board members and from other people, I think we should keep in mind, are there unintended consequences that we need to be aware of the zoning? I would say, too, that whatever we decide on the zoning tonight, if any of these are not going forward for October and are moving forward to January, I think we should pick our top 3 priorities for January, not tonight, but at our next meeting. And then, as both Mike and Brian suggested earlier, schedule time every single meeting to work on those top 3 priorities and commit to that discussion. So I am going to throw it back open to board members and say, what would you like to do with the articles that are in front of us? And look for your suggestions. So Cheryl, you had your hand up first while I was talking, and then I think Alex, I just saw yours. So
Right. I would like to say that the 2 articles that I've been working on, the accessory dwelling unit and the inclusionary zoning, be postponed. I'd like to suggest that we host workshops dedicated to those topics independently, so 1 workshop for each topic, and that we give sufficient notice for that, and, you know, invite participants to give us their comments, then bring that back to this board to continue the work.
okay. I think independent workshops on zoning makes a lot of sense. We've done the introductory piece where we've talked about all of the things that we like, but with the amount of zoning that we had in front of us, it was hard to get into that level of detail. I think a few people mentioned that, so I think that's a great idea.
And one of the reasons I think it's important to push these off is the town council review, which I asked about. So I wouldn't have the workshop until we have the town council review. So
Yes.
to the extent that we can continue to ask for that, I would think that would be great. I'd like to say that I think non-conforming dimensions can move forward. I think that the questions people have about that, I think, can be adequately explained. And the purpose of it, I think, is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
And those are my thoughts for now.
All right, well, Alex, I'm going to turn to you because you were next, and also non-conforming dimensions is one of the ones you drafted. So what are your thoughts?
I think that all of the articles, except for the non-conforming dimension, should be withdrawn. And I think that we should discuss process at next meeting. In other words, if we choose one of your articles as one of the big 3, then doing a process is fine. And it should be probably no more than 2 at a time.
Yeah, I think
Or
that's,
maybe, well, we could, but to discuss process.
yeah, I would certainly welcome that question at our next meeting. So, okay.
And I mean, I've looked at Ned's changes, and I've heard Cheryl say, well, this applies to a non-conforming house with, if it has a variance, I mean, it seems to me that the issue may be that the house is non-conforming and may be grandfathered, and it doesn't have a variance, because if it has a variance, it is belts and suspenders getting another variance to put a conforming.
It was pre-existing non-conforming, so it doesn't have a variance to start with, so it needs a variance to go, to make changes to
All I'm
expand.
saying is, if it's under a variance, if it gets a variance and then you put something conforming onto it, I think that it's still okay. I agree with that. But
That's
that
not,
is
that's,
in
that's
any
not my
event,
experience, that's the way it's happened here.
Well, in any event, that's
Yeah.
really neither here nor there. I know what Ned is. It seems to me that I wrote this because of special permits and setback areas. And I suppose that the existing height is fine. I don't know that, do we want it to be in any residence district? That could be probably, that'd be okay. But I would like it to be consistent with other houses in the neighborhood. I don't want them to, you know, bump up against the lot line when no one else does. Because then everyone's going to bump up against the lot line.
So Alex, is that the 300 feet? provision that Ned
That's the,
suggested removing?
Correct.
Yeah, that's, I wouldn't take that out.
How did you arrive at that 300 feet, just on a?
What?
300 feet, so let's say if you have 100 feet of, 50 feet of frontage, you're going to have like 4 houses away maybe.
You could say in the neighborhood.
Yeah, because like to
In the
Ned's point,
neighborhood
you
might
might
be
have
better.
B across the street and C here, and is 300 feet the right? I think in the neighborhood, it gives a
I
little,
mean, it's
yeah,
not defined, but it's, it would probably be okay.
yeah.
This is how I think these bylaws can move forward, this kind of discussion, because I think you should say B and C. Why broaden it to, I mean, if it's an A or a double A, you got an acre or 2 acres, you're saying people are non-conforming,
I guess that A and double A probably.
don't really need it, so why
Shouldn't get
include
this.
it?
Well, you might have it for height though, like if you have a house that's 3 stories now, that's non-conforming, because you're allowed 2.5 stories. And so if you're going to do an expansion and you want it to look architecturally compatible, you'll need a variance.
Well, and also to get
And
other
even though-
houses in the neighborhood that look that way.
But even if it meets all other zoning criteria, just because the existing house, whether it's in a B, a double A, wherever it is, I mean, there, if you go around town, you'll see there are quite a few houses, the larger houses that are more than 2.5 stories.
Yeah, and in fact,
It seemed like when this came up, Ned, in my mind, kind of initiated it, and
Yeah.
that's fine, but it seemed to be that it was a dimensional thing because of, more often than not, properties that were too close to, the property line. And I'm sure height becomes an issue too, but I think, like what you acknowledge that people are looking at is, we don't want to suffer negative consequences. And if you're right, that's fine, but if B and C covers 90% of the potential issues, then let's call it B and C. And let the guy from A or double A come for the variance on it.
well,
The reason-
sorry, the reason for, I mean, the advantage of this is limiting it to residence C is the most restrictive because it's limiting it to one district. So we could go forward with C and B, and then if town meeting wanted it all, again, you're lifting the restrictions, so it would still be, it would be less restrictive than originally proposed. It would be okay to do that. I want to, I don't want to leave this until we've clarified our views on all of the changes, so.
I just
Cheryl,
want to go
you're
back to
next.
height for a minute,
Yeah.
because this is something that I've looked at for several residences in town. The way the older homes have a reasonable basement, so, steps to get up. So they run into pre-existing non-conforming, run into the definition of where the first story is. And so what happens is, they might, if they can bring in a little bit of fill and not trigger the fill review, then they'll do that, not to have to trigger an appeal process. You're talking about people who want to improve a home that hasn't had any investment in it in 40 years or 50 years. There are lots of people buying these kinds of homes who want to have a bigger kitchen, that want to have a master bedroom suite. And I've had realtors ask me, can you look at this and see how reasonable it is to add this? So it is something, I think, that Ned mentioned it, but I've seen it a number of times myself. So that height issue is unintended consequence, I believe, of overlaying zoning on something without understanding that it was going to trigger so many people to be non-conforming, so many homes to be non-conforming. So I think it's a fix to the zoning that we have is really what it is. It's what it should be, a fix.
I think the original
Something that
quote,
was not
yeah.
done properly when
Yeah.
it was put in place.
I think the original quote that came up was that the vast majority of these houses, which people value when you look at them, it's like the federal homes, could not actually be built today under our zoning.
Right.
And they're the ones that people love to see. The old Victorians, maybe they're set a little bit too close to the street. Maybe they're set a little bit close to the side lot, but that's what the problem
I
is,
mean, to
yeah.
hop on the subject, but again, the houses you're describing that come to mind, that
Yeah.
Ned has described, that come to mind, are in B and C.
Well, we could,
It
yeah,
I mean, the broader you make things, the more you loan it to suffering negative consequences that you didn't foresee.
Well, and the intention of doing this was because the description was about all these lots predating zoning, that were
Right.
little lots on which there were big houses. I mean, that was the picture we were given in doing this. And so I could go in B or C, we're expanding it.
So B or C, so that first change would be on a lot established before 1938 in a residence B or C district.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the second change
1,
is
2, or 3 are fine.
1, 2, or 3 are fine. Then the third change starts 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down towards the end where it's crossed out for no more than 3 feet above the maximum
Well, within
height.
the existing height of the dwelling is
You're okay
probably
with that?
okay.
Everybody's okay with that? Okay.
And then just within 300 feet,
So
say
you would
in the
keep that.
neighborhood, unless someone could get a more precise term
Yeah,
this
but-
late at night.
Approximately 300 feet, so we can be a little bit.
Approximately, if we're going to put standards, we need to have
And then I
them
would
set.
300 feet is too small.
Then I
because
would say it has to be more.
That's
I
2 or
agree.
3 homes. I
Yeah.
mean, 50,
But-
1,000
1,000?
feet,
Let's say
1,000
that
feet would be, that's 10
neighborhood
houses.
And the Board of Appeals will figure it out. Good enough.
Again, if we're going to put standards in, I would rather have that's the thing that's catching us up in all of the other zoning
So I
articles,
mean,
is
1,000
that the
feet would
standard's
be
not specific
10,
enough.
20 homes in either direction.
I would go with 1,000 feet. No, sorry, guy.
All the
Hold.
lawyers now want to get involved.
Where's Peter Mullen? We've only got 2 out of 3 lawyers.
Close to that.
Okay, both lawyers who raised their hands come forward. I'm happy to hear from the lawyers.
For lawyers, huh?
Special treatment for lawyers on this article because they both brought it forward originally.
Ned Corcoran, the general
Yes.
bylaw already provides that it cannot have a detrimental impact on the neighborhood when you're granting a special permit. I don't think you need to have language that says within the neighborhood.
All right, whoa. Hang on. Marion, you
But
too. You had your
I
hand up.
agree, but I like the last two. I'd be all in favor of leaving them in because they're usually talked about when you talk about substantial impact, detrimental impact on the neighborhood. Just to keep in mind, though, that the standard for a special permit is no substantial detriment to the neighborhood. It's already in the bylaw. So I don't think you need to put in 300 feet or anything like that. You need to have the language. It's a good idea to put that language in because it provides further guidance as to what you're talking about when you talk about what can hurt or not hurt a neighborhood. Something that's not in keeping with the architecture and the general siting of houses in that neighborhood might be something that would have a substantial detrimental impact. So if you want to put more language in the bylaw because you want to make it clearer to everybody what you're looking for in this town, I think it's a good idea, but I don't think you need to get into something as specific as the number of feet of neighborhood that you're talking about, because
We're taking out the number of feet, and we're just saying in the neighborhood.
So you're comfortable with taking out the number of feet?
I support that, but
Okay.
I'm concerned because, well, I told you, I'm going to write you a memo about this bylaw. It's very confusing to me.
Okay.
Because we have a special permit standard already. It exists, and we have a section 4A already, which pertains to special permits for pre-existing non-conforming lots and structures. The reason that's become confused, I believe, is because of these 2 recent cases. So not because of
Alex
what's in
and
our
I have
bylaw
Cheryl.
right now.
One quick thing. It seems to me this is just our recommendation. We recommend adoption with these changes, and then the warrant committee
Yes.
is going to decide what to put in their recommendation, and your memo and Ned's memo and all the other memos, Ted is receiving them.
Why did you do it this way rather than amending 4A? Any particular
It seems
reason?
right to me.
Okay, no, I just wondered if there was a particular reason.
Look, I did it, and I
No, it's
I
fine.
think that
You can
this
do
would
it
be
this way.
fine.
While they're there, Emily, just a
Yes.
question. So.
Don't move yet.
Yeah, I just want, Marion, I wasn't clear about whether you said you supported the proposed change that Ned had made, which is to strike that number 2. Do you have the copy of Ned's right there?
I think she
Yeah,
just said
I
yes.
do.
Yes.
I think that, well,
The whole thing?
all right, I just want to make sure what you're talking
Because there's
about.
actually 2 things in that, I think.
See, again, I should give you these comments in writing. I felt that number 1 and number 2 were were related to the issue of substantial detriment to the neighborhood and didn't need to be made this specific. I didn't see how that was really going to help. And it just bothered me that it was so specific, because when you put something that specific in there's an unintended consequence with zoning. So I want you to think about that carefully. I thought the architecturally compatible section number 3 was good, and reasonably necessary for dwelling purposes, yes.
Okay.
Those are things that
Just wanna-
are addressed in these hearings, and they can be made explicit.
Okay.
So Marion, you have a problem with 1 as well. I just want to throw that back to the board. So thank you both.
I'm not opposed to it. I think 1 is the sort of thing you talk about, but you talk about that as a way of describing that there's no detriment.
Okay.
You say, you're not blocking the view, you're not blocking light from the neighboring houses, and you talk, as a matter of fact, about architecture.
We'd like the Board of Appeals to know what they should be thinking about.
But you do have to think carefully if you're going to make it that specific as to whether somehow you're also making it difficult for someone who ought to have been able to be given permission, but now cannot, because you put this in your bylaw, but you didn't think about this other instance. That's sometimes why these bylaws are written with general language that then has to be applied in a specific way, and there's a long history of how that's been done, and it makes some sense. So I'm a little worried about something that's very specific that might end up excluding a case that
Right.
you'd want to give discretion.
It seems to me the warrant committee can solve that.
So let me just clarify, thank you both. Let me just clarify what I have is, we're going to change the inner resident C to B or C. We're going to accept 1, 2, or 3 on the second line. We're going to delete the part that begins with "for no more than," and we're going to add the part that begins within the existing. We're going to delete the current number 2, and
No, we're going to keep it.
we're going to keep it. I thought we were going to delete that. I thought you just told Mary
we
we
were
were
going
going
to
to.
keep it and say "in the neighborhood."
So are the same or less than
com-
non-compliances and setbacks or heights of other dwellings within the
in
neighborhood?
the
Okay,
neighborhood,
all right.
Right. And
That's
then
fine. If there's already a standard for
if
neighborhood, then
that's-
I'm okay with that. Everybody else, we're good with that? And then that means 4 becomes 4 and the last is typo. Everybody's good with that one? All right. Do I have a motion on this one?
I move that all the articles but the.
Oh, no, just do this at one first.
Okay.
I'm not disagreeing with all the articles. I just want to
I
keep
think
this
I-
one separate, that's all.
I move that we recommend, that our recommendation be this article, to approve this article as amended.
All right, and submit that language to the warrant committee as our
Well, no,
recommendation.
I mean, we don't have to vote to submit it. We will submit it because we
Okay.
are, we like the warrant committee.
Do we have a second on that?
Second.
Do we have any further discussion on this one? All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Okay, on the other ones, so Cheryl,
Do we need to close the public hearing?
we probably should close the public hearing,
Make a
yes.
motion to close the public hearing on this on the zoning bylaws.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, so we've now closed the public hearing. Okay, so on the other articles, Cheryl has said that she'd like to withdraw hers and, continue to move them forward. I am happy with withdrawing all of mine and continue to move them forward. I've heard Alex's comments, as I've already said, were excellent and thorough, and I appreciate them. I've heard very helpful comments for the rest, so I'm happy to withdraw them.
Yeah, I say that I echo what you just said.
Yeah.
My only, my particular article, the non-conforming business, was moved forward for a specific reason, which
Yes.
was the potential citizens article that may come forward. So I just, I withdraw it, but make aware that that's going to potentially show up either here or in May. So I think we need to keep that in mind as we evaluate which articles to focus on.
Well, I agree, and I would say that all of the articles we've had in front of us, including the 2 condo bylaw articles, come back as our discussion of priorities. And remember that we have 2 deadlines next year. We've got January for the May town meeting, and we've got next August for the October town meeting. This year, we're starting a little bit earlier for the October 2016, we're starting a little bit earlier, in fact, much earlier than we were able to do so this year. So we should keep that in mind as we look at them. Any other thoughts on the other articles? What I'd like to do is I'd like to have a formal vote to withdraw them, so I can report that to the Board of Selectmen on Tuesday and the board, and the warrant committee on Wednesday. So, any other discussion?
Well, I'd like to make a motion.
Please.
I could discuss them all night, but.
And you will, but not tonight.
Tonight's almost over. I move that we withdraw all the articles that were proposed other than the non-conforming dimensions bylaw.
Excellent. And do we have a second on that?
Can I just ask, sorry, I should have brought this up earlier. We didn't discuss lighting at all?
No, nobody mentioned lighting, but I add that to the ones I'm going to withdraw.
Okay,
So.
all right, fine. No other comments?
Second, all right. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay.
Abstain.
I think that, Bill, you might call town council off and that at our next meeting, we can
Yes.
formulate some specific questions for town council, because it does seem to me that asking him to review the, well, in any event, we can formulate specific questions.
Yep.
We could prioritize.
Yeah, come to our next meeting with your top 3 priorities, and then we'll work that out among ourselves. We'll make sure it's on the agenda. And again, I think this is a very valuable process to go through, and I'm very glad that we did it. What's that thing about watching sausage being made? I think one of the most important lessons is how difficult, in fact, it is to write good zoning, especially in a constrained timeframe. So I want to thank everybody who participated, and I'll report to the Board of Selectmen and the Warrant Committee. All right, so next on our agenda, and thank you for their patience, is the public hearing for Thayer Nursery. This is for special permit and site plan review approval. It was continued from August 27th. As the applicant is coming forward, I'm going to run through our process. We're going to have the report from staff on outstanding items and the new information received, update from the applicant on those same outstanding items, and any others. Questions from board members, testimony from members of the public, and of course, I'll, as per usual, read through the rules when we get to that point, and then we will discuss what we are doing for our next meeting. So Ned, would you and your client like to come forward on Thayer? Or just you, however you want to do it. And while you're doing that, Tim or Bill, which one of you is going to report on outstanding?
So we've received an updated, clean copy of a drainage plan,
Okay.
as well as a updated stormwater report and operations and maintenance plan. I think that's all we've
We
received since the last hearing.
letter from the town engineer.
Also, a letter from the town engineer about the drainage impacts on the town infrastructure.
Okay. Before you start, remind me we didn't talk about, when you did your motion, were you considering that we were withdrawing the amplified sound as well, since it was an article?
Well, we didn't, I guess we withdrew it.
Okay, I'm just double checking. We can talk about it afterwards.
I'm not sure we want to withdraw it.
Well, I was thinking the same thing, but I was thinking that it was being submitted by the Board of Selectmen rather than the Planning Board.
All right, so we will come back to that because that wasn't actually part of the public hearing. We're going to discuss it at the same time. All right, Ned, I apologize. I just had to clarify that while I was sitting in my brain. So we'll come back to it.
Good catch.
So please, go ahead.
Okay, so Ned Corcoran on behalf of Thayer Nursery. I'm joined by Josh Oldfield, and Maggie Oldfield is also present. I think as Tim suggested, the drainage plan has been submitted. It's been reviewed by town engineer. I think his comments speak for themselves, that we had nothing else to put forward. And I think it's up to the board's discretion at this point whether the board has received enough in order to close the hearing.
All right. In that case, board members, we've received the new information. I'm hoping you've had a chance to review it. Are there any questions at this point on the information that we received since our last meeting?
Well,
If not, I'll pull it to the public.
we did today receive some material which you should hear about.
From the applicant or from
From
the,
the
one of the abutters?
commenters.
Yes, that will be part, that's going to be part of the public input, so
Right,
I will, yes.
exactly. I mean, you asked if there were any questions.
Oh, sorry, I meant for the applicant, but yes, that's an excellent point, and I have it in front of me, and that's going to be absolutely part of the public input. Are there any?
Has the applicant received this?
I don't know. Have you received a letter to Attorney Matthew Dunn from Kavanaugh Tachi Associates? Are you in receipt of that?
Yes, I
Okay.
received an email copy of that a little bit before 5 o'clock this afternoon. I haven't, obviously hadn't had a chance to review it.
Understood. So, anything else from board members before we open it up to the public as part of the public hearing? Any questions on the information we received from the applicant? All right. Seeing none, I would ask the two of you to step back. So we're going to open up the public hearing portion of this. Again, the standard rules. Wait to be recognized before speaking. Come to the table and give your name and address. Speak into the microphone. When you are done, please leave the table. All questions or comments must be directed to the chair. Speakers may not cross-examine applicant, board members, or other speakers, and the applicant will be asked to respond to questions at the end of the public input section. Now, is Mr. Dunn here? Mr. Dunn, I know you have a request to make of us, so I was going to ask if you don't mind waiting to after the other members of the public speak, and then you can make your request on behalf of your client. I know they've got some information that they wanted to submit. You had a request about continuing the hearing, so I thought we'd have the other questions first and then move on. Okay. Does anybody else wish to speak at this public hearing at this point? Any other comments from members of the public? All right. In that case, Mr. Dunn, please come forward.
Thank you again. Matthew Dunn, I represent Philip Joining and John Rowe, 23 Parkwood Drive. Just to bring everybody up to speed, both the board and the public, on August 27th, I think was the last time we were before the board on this matter. Prior to that hearing, I had submitted a letter concerning the requirement in the bylaw amendment for a noise mitigation plan that Thayer submit. Since that time, I was aware that Thayer had submitted a report dated June 12th from Ascentech. Mr. Joining and Mr. Rowe, at their own cost and expense, have retained, as the board's aware, Kavanaugh and Tachi to do a peer review of that report. Unfortunately, the report was just provided to me this afternoon, and I apologize for the delay in getting that to the board, but there was a great deal of information to process in order to give a meaningful analysis of the Ascentech report, and then to comment on conditions at Thayer in light of some investigative work that Kavanaugh and Tachi had collected. So I'm going to get into that in a moment. There's really two open matters that I'd like to discuss. The first one is the drainage plan. That was I submitted a letter to the board before the long weekend on September 4th, just requesting a continuance in order for a second professional engineer retained by Mr. Joining and Mr. Rowe, Michael Giuliano of Eagle Brook Engineering, an opportunity to review the revised site plan that was submitted by Thayer. The revised site plan, I think when we were here before on August 27th, there was a misunderstanding, I believe, as to the fact that Mr. Giuliano had been provided with the revised site plan. That had not occurred on August 27th. That document was not provided to Mr. Giuliano until September 2nd. about a week ago from today. There was a discussion in the last hearing about us providing Mr. Giuliano's peer review to this board in advance of the hearing. Due to the approximately 1 week delay in him obtaining the revised site plan, that was impossible. It requires a pretty comprehensive analysis, which is a work in progress by Mr. Giuliano, and he just needed more time. Now, I understand that a continuance can only be granted, and I did request a continuance in that September 4th letter. I understand that the public hearing had already been noticed, and a continuance can only be granted once the notice public hearing is opened, and then the request is made, and then this board moves for that. Mr. Joe Wenning and Mr. Rowe are requesting that continuance, and I'd like to explain why, because I think it promotes it's in the interest of this hearing, and it's in furtherance of I think the intent of the bylaw amendment. The bylaw amendment that Thayer is utilizing to apply for a special permit has an entire subparagraph that requires Thayer to make a showing that no adverse impact on the drainage plan must show that there's going to be no adverse impact on neighbor's property, that the drainage plan will not increase water flow on the neighbor's property, and will not create ponding on the neighbor's property. All three provisions of the requirement of that subparagraph of the bylaw contemplate a full understanding by the neighbors of the drainage impact on their property. Mr. Joe Wenning and Mr. Rowe are direct abutters and neighbors of Thayer Nursery. They have spent a substantial amount of money in retaining Mr. Giuliano and Eagle Brook Engineering to assess first multiple versions of the drainage plan, and now this drainage plan that's being this final drainage plan that's being proposed. The fact that the report is a work in progress is not Mr. Joe Wenning or Mr. Rowe's fault. It's the applicants who delayed the production of that revised drainage plan to Eagle Brook and caused the delay in them generating their peer review that was requested by this board. Mr. Joe Wenning and Mr. Rowe are the most impacted neighbors of Thayer's drainage plan. They're the downslope neighbors of Thayer that have already experienced a significant amount of water damage as a result of the unmitigated flow of water on the property, and they're entitled to know what the drainage plan impact is going to be to remedy that problem. They're entitled to know what's proposed, and thereafter to engage the applicant during a public hearing on its strengths and weaknesses. That's the revised drainage plan. Accordingly, and in the interest of fairness to Mr. Joe Wenning and Mr. Rowe, they request a continuance of this public hearing in order to submit Mr. Giuliano's report, and then to have a in-depth discussion, a meaningful discussion on what Thayer has proposed. So that's point one of the request for the continuance. Point two has to do, and I mentioned this earlier, with the noise mitigation plan, or lack thereof, that's been presented or hasn't been presented by Thayer. The bylaw amendment has another subparagraph that talks about an applicant's requirement to provide the planning board with a plan that specifies the proposed measures that it will take to control noise created by its business operations from infringing upon the reasonable quiet and enjoyment of the butters and nearby residents. That's a requirement as part of the application process. So there's a noise mitigation plan that's contemplated. Thayer's presented no such evidence in support of its application on this point. Rather, it's submitted a site plan that is, and we had a discussion about this at the last hearing, that is malleable. There's no commitment to Thayer on the size and location of a perimeter fence that is purportedly going to act as some sort of sound mitigation for the abutters. this builds on itself because Thayer has submitted, in an effort to satisfy the requirement of this portion of the bylaw, the Ascentech report. The Ascentech report is premised on the fact that Thayer is going to construct a 10-foot sound barrier along the perimeter of its property. That's one problem with the Ascentech report. I'm going to rely on and I'll go into the report a little bit, but I think it speaks for itself, of Kavanaugh and Tachi with regards to analyzing the whole, the weakness of the Ascentech report if it's submitted to satisfy this subparagraph of the bylaw amendment. Again, it's premised on the erection of the 10-foot fence, which has been discussed at length, is unlikely to be constructed. And if it is constructed, it's going to be constructed at a smaller size and possibly in a different location that was contemplated in the Ascentech report. If that's the case, the Ascentech report is useless. It provides no information as to how noise is going to be controlled or mitigated to abutting properties. Even if the fence is built, however, the Ascentech report provides no evidence that Thayer has taken any measures to control sound. The Kavanaugh-Tachi report that I've submitted today proves how wholly inadequate the Ascentech report really is and how it fails to satisfy the requirements of the bylaw amendment. First, it only measures noise generated by 2 of Thayer's 16 motorized vehicles. If you have the report, part of Thayer's application is the amount of vehicles that it proposes to reintroduce to the site if the special permit is granted. And it's on Exhibit B to the Ascentech report. I'm sorry, to the Kavanaugh-Tachi report.
Which
I don't-
I only printed out, it was 28 pages, I printed out the front of it.
Okay, so you
There's-
didn't print out the
there's
appendices,
that you all
but
have
they're in the
electronically.
email that we
Yes.
have, okay. Sorry, Mr. Dunn, you'll have to read it to us.
Okay. The vehicles that seek to be reintroduced to the site are a Chevy Silverado pickup, a Chevy 550 dump truck, a Chevy dump truck, a CMC top kick dump truck, a Mack dump truck, a Chevy 550 dump truck, a Sprinter van, a water tank hydro seeder, a John Deere excavator, Bobcats 1, 2, 3, and 4, a Bobcat Gator, a John Deere Gator, and a golf cart. Only two of these vehicles are the subject of the Ascentech report. The other 14, there's no mention on the impact of the noise generated by those vehicles will have on abutting properties. And in addition to that, of the 2 vehicles that are tested, they're not tested simultaneously as in simultaneous operation. They're tested individually by Ascentech on 30-second spurts. And in addition to that, they're tested at set locations, at set distances from abutting property lines. And on top of all that, the noise generated, even under those conditions, exceeds the objective standards set by DEP for allowable decibel levels. Those single vehicles operating at staged locations on the Thayer site still exceed the acceptable levels, the maximum acceptable decibel levels set by DEP. So if Thayer wants to go forward with their application at this point, and again would ask for a continuance because the noise impact needs to be more thoroughly assessed. The Ascentech report is superficial at best as to what the sound impact is going to be. I was trying to think of an analysis or analogy driving over as to what it is, and it's essentially testing a popcorn machine in Terminal A and telling East Boston that Logan Airport isn't going to generate any noise. I mean, this is just, it's not an appropriate document to support the activities that are going to be undertaken at Thayer if the special permit is granted. So if the public hearing would close today, then the planning board should preclude Thayer from submitting any additional supplements to its application. And if that's the case, then Thayer's special permit application should be denied. In fact, it must be denied because Thayer has failed to satisfy all the requirements of the bylaw amendment. And that's included in the bylaw amendment itself, that there has to be a showing that the applicant satisfies all provisions of the amendment. And that can't be done based on the information if there's plans to rely on the Ascentec report. And again, I apologize for the delay in getting the Kavanaugh-Tachi report over to you. But if you have an opportunity to read it, the actual body of the document itself is only about 7 pages without the appendix. So, I think it would be, again, based on the information that's been provided by the peer review report that's been provided by Kavanaugh-Tachi, illustrating the inadequacy of their application as to satisfying the subparagraph in the bylaw amendment with regards to noise mitigation. And also, as a matter of fairness, giving Mr. Giuliano an opportunity to thoroughly review